Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here. But first and foremost, welcome to the very first episode of the Horror Anime Month of 2019, where I will be reviewing 13 animes that are considered horror. So the first one I decided to pick for this feature was Vampire Princess Miyu, the TV series from 1997. And in case you didn't know, I actually did review the OVA series from 1988. So knowing that, I will talk a little bit about it here, and will also be comparing the two. But firstly, let's talk about the TV series with 26 episodes. So I have to reoccur some of the basic stuff. So the main character is Miyu, and yes, she is indeed a vampire, but she's also the guardian of Japan. And she happens to have a partner named Larva, who is a Shinma who came from the western side of the world. And to sum up what a Shinma is that they are basically demons that take advantage of humans, and they also devour their soul, and of course they just wreak havoc all over the world. And Miyu's main job is that she has to take out all the Shinmas and send them back to the Shadow Realm. Oh wait, I mean the Darkness. Well, thankfully 4Kids had nothing to do with this one. So the TV series is really different compared to the OVA. Now the whole taking out the Shinma thing, that's all the same. But the difference is really the characters and some of its themes. Such as in the OVA, one of the main characters was Himiko, who was a spiritualist who was working for a detective agency for that she was trying to hunt down Miyu for being a murderer for drinking people's blood. Where in the TV series, it's about Miyu who is blending in the public by going to a high school and end up befriending some students. So the one that approaches Miyu happens to be Chisato, and she ends up giving her a friendship keychain. And two of her other friends happen to be Yukari, who is a tomboy who is also very headstrong, and the other happens to be Hisai, who is the typical quiet type who's also very intelligent. So obviously, the three of them are not aware of her being a vampire or any of the Shinma shit, but whenever they're out and about and hanging out, usually Miyu tends to be the one that notices something is a little off. And the thing that's a little off happens to be a Shinma that is possessing a human. But I should also mention that Miyu also has another partner alongside her, and that happens to be a bunny rabbit called Sheena. And she also has some really weird ass powers with her giant eyeball. And I have a feeling they probably took that idea from a mixture of Sailor Moon with Luna, or even with Magic Knight Rayearth with Mokuna. And I would assume that having cute sidekick characters at the time was a huge deal, so that's why they added it in here. So another exclusive character I have to mention is Raya. And she's very similar to Miyu, but only that she's more of the rival character, and she also does her job at destroying Shinmas very differently. So the way Miyu wants to do it is that she wants to take care of them, but while keeping casualties down as much as possible, sacrificing the little to save more. And Raya's way of taking care of things is with an iron fist, so meaning that she just doesn't give a fuck. And she happens to have a companion too, and that happens to be Matsukaze, who is a creepy looking doll. So every now and again they run into each other, and while they are trying to work for the same goal, of course she happens to be the rival type. So really, to sum it all up, while Miyu is just doing her job the best that she could, she also wants to protect Chisato and her friends from the dangers of the Shinmas. So now, let's start moving on and start talking about the show's animation. And I gotta be honest, the animation here is very mixed for me. So I gotta talk about the good. So the overall art direction I think is really good. I think everything at least looks good, like the backgrounds, the character designs, all that is all really well done. And it can be pretty gritty as well, though not in the same sense as it was in the OVA, but still pretty gritty enough. Now as for the parts that are not as good, well, the animation flow is very inconsistent. Like, you have some parts that actually do flow nicely and are well animated, but then you have other parts that just look a little bit lower budget. So the fact that it is inconsistent is pretty underwhelming, given that the OVA series, I thought the animation in that one was pretty damn good, all things considered. So yeah, overall, the animation is a mixed bag for me. Some good things, some not so good things. And now, as for the show's music, the music in this one is still really good, but it is very different though. So this one's music is kind of like the same thing, where you do get some atmospheric stuff, and you also do get some pretty cool tunes for like the fight scenes and shit. But it just has a very different vibe to it though. It's kind of hard to explain, But thankfully, at least the music is still really good, but personally, I still prefer the OST for the OVA itself, but this one is by no means bad. It's still good, it's just different. And the opening and the ending themes are still really good. In fact, I'd say that the opening in this one is actually better than the OVA's opening, which was, not bad, but just, wasn't really like a typical opening theme. And the ending song in this one is pretty good, but I do prefer the ending theme to the OVA series, but this one is still pretty good too. And now, as for the show's voice acting, if you're watching this one in English, goddamn is it a mess. But is it better than the English voice acting in the OVA series? Honestly, it's about the same. So it has like a lot of the same flaws where there's a lot of characters that sound robotic and just bored with the whole thing, like they didn't give a shit. And the weird thing is too, is that the cast for this one actually does have some pretty good ones. So with Miyu, she was actually voiced by two different voice actors. So at the first 7 episodes, she was voiced by Kimberly J. Brown, and then later on until the end, she was voiced by Dorothy Fawn. And unfortunately, both of them just were not good at all in this one. But something I do have to mention about Dorothy Fawn is that I actually remember watching an interview last year with her, and she said that her least favorite role that she's ever worked on was Miyu, and the reason why she said it was her least favorite was not because she thought the character sucked or that the show sucked, but really because the voice director was apparently an asshole and also just didn't do a good job at all, and it clearly shows here. Because I really can't praise like anyone in this show. Everyone just did a really bad job here. But like I said though, I can't blame the actors. It's the voice director that just did a piss poor job. Like just other example voice actors that I do like are ones like Wendy Lee, Mona Marshall, Kirk Thornton, Melissa Fawn, Bob Preppenbrook, Richard Consino, and even Steve Blum. So that's really unfortunate, but despite how bad the dubbing is on this one, it does have a few moments that are like laugh out loud hilarious though, but if you do want to watch this one to be serious about it, I recommend watching in Japanese. I end up having to finish the series like that, because the English in this one just flat out just sucked. And now, as for my overall thoughts on Vampire Princess Miyu from 1997, is that I actually like it, but as much as I do like it though, I'm very perplexed on it. Because there are some things about it that I really do like a lot, and then there's other things that are just not as good. But even compared to the OVA, I'm really not sure which one I like better, because there are certain things about each of them that I do like a little better than each other. So the overall story in this one, I think is really great, and also the characters are really well done. They definitely do get a lot more development. For an example, you get to know a lot more about Larva, where in the OVA you really didn't, which was kind of unfortunate, but here you get a lot of it and it's really good. And the new original characters are pretty good, I do really like them. And hell, some of the minor characters are even pretty good too for what they are. And just as an example, there was one really depressing episode that was about like 2 orphan kids that happen to have some weird supernatural powers and everyone treats them like shit. It's a really dark and grim episode, but I thought the characters in that one were pretty well done. So a lot of that kind of stuff I do prefer over the OVA. And another thing that I liked better than the OVA is the show's ending, cause yes, the ending in the OVA was just abrupt and just didn't really work well, but for here, it was actually a pretty satisfying conclusion. And as for the things that I didn't like as much, well, the animation is definitely a step down in my opinion. Also the fight scenes in this one, while they do have some good music, and some of them do have some good animation, some of them, unfortunately, I find them to be a little bit repetitive because all it is just Miyu does her like fireball attack on the Shinma in one hit and it dies. At least that's how most of them die. And if that doesn't work, then Larva just happens to like take him out with his scythe or his long ass fingernails. Now my problem with this is that it's not so much that it's predictable, but it's more the fact that it's just not as creative and it just got kind of tiresome. I mean, at least in Fist of the North Star, whenever someone dies, yeah, they all die by getting their heads exploded or just some other part of their bodies explode, but at least there were some pretty creative kills in it. Where in this one, it's literally just Miyu going, yo, check this out, Hadouken! And like, the thing dies and that's it, over and over. But at least the final fight within this one was changed up quite a bit, so that was kinda nice. But despite these issues, I still really enjoyed this one. I'm just unsure if I like it better than the OVA, for that this one does have many improvements, but also does have some things that are just not as good, or just things that I just prefer. I guess you could say it's kinda like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. And I would recommend it for that I do like it and I do think it is good, but I'm unsure if I'd recommend it more or less over with the OVA, because at least with the OVA, it is short. Or this one with 26 episodes, well, that's not long at all, especially compared to many other long-ass animes out there. And I have to mention that there was a couple episodes that were between 10 and 20 that I just wasn't like fully into, but despite those ones though, I still like this one. Also, another thing you gotta keep in mind is that because this one has the whole school setting thing, at least for the most part, I can see some people not liking that, which is perfectly fine, and I can understand that, especially nowadays where it's just overdone beyond belief. But for me personally, it doesn't totally bother me as long as I'm entertained, and well, in this one, yeah, I was pretty entertained. So yeah, overall, compared to the other OVA that I reviewed previously, I'd say it's about equal.